Grateful to those of you who have returned for the continued study on understanding the will of God. And even though we have some that were not able to get here this week, we have Virgil and Carolyn coming this time that weren't here last week, and that'll call for a little bit of a review and then move right on into the study that we are continuing on this subject. In regard to understanding the will of God, we noted that it really calls for a three-dimensional look at God's will. One is in regard to His ideal will that He has primarily expressed over the generations of people on the earth through His covenants. And then, of course, as to individuals, leaders like Moses or the prophets and others. Then, of course, Christ came. And interwoven through all of these years and these people and that portion of His revelation is His ideal will. Second part of His will is His allowed will. And that's important to see. I might mention in the introductory material that we've given, there are a number of passages that related to the covenants and all, and we have already given that material. And then there are passages dealing with His allowed will, and we have looked at some of those passages. Choose ye this day whom you will serve indicates there's a human opportunity. We can either turn to God, submit to God, or we can go our own way, or listen to someone else, follow some other philosophy. And then the third phase of God's will, not only His ideal and allowed will, but His ultimate will. And that particular part is quite significant because we looked at some passages identifying the fact that each one of us, somewhere down the way, will give an account of himself unto God. That's very clearly expressed in a passage like Romans, the 14th chapter, verses 10 through 12, and other passages that we had listed. We also observed, especially in our last study, that because there has been some confusion both in religious teaching as well as just human nature in not knowing these factors, there's been all kinds of human speculation and sometimes frustration and irritation and some denial in regard to God. Been skeptical of God, been frustrated about God, or the atheist, of course, would say there is no God. And all of these factors we've already looked at. That's a very, very quick sweeping survey of what we looked at in the earlier lessons. Today, we're going to do a little different. Hope you have your Bible, and we'll be doing a great deal of Bible reading. In the introductory material, down toward the bottom of the mimeographed or copy sheet that you received, we had the passage Deuteronomy 12 and verse 8, which was a time that God said through Moses, I'm giving you some time also. That's in the booklet that each one of you has received. That quote is in it also. Long ago, God warned man against such fleshly folly, and we're talking about all these different views that men have held that may seem right, but ultimately do fail and even lead to death itself. Long ago, God warn man against such fleshly folly through Moses stating, "You shall not do at all what we are doing here today." And then he identifies what he means by that. Every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. That's what we're going to especially be looking at today. What we are doing here today by emphasizing one thing at first. There'll be something else later. But at first, want us to note the emphasis that God gave in regard to the place. And that's going to lead us now to these passages. Deuteronomy 1, verses 1 through 8 is the first passage we'll be looking at. If you turn there, just notice in this reading an emphasis that God gives to the place. It may not seem that significant in this particular passage, but I think it will before we finish all the passages we're going to look at that emphasized about the place. Deuteronomy 12, verse 1. "These are the statutes and judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land that the Lord your God is of your fathers has given you to possess as long as you live on the earth." Now, I might mention, don't take that to mean all the people that'll ever live on the earth. He's talking about that generation and where they're going to live in his plans, in the covenant he made with them. And here is another arrival, Dan. If you could get to him the material. We're in Deuteronomy, the 12th chapter, if you want to be turning to it, Jacob, and we can go right along with us thereafter. But he'll give you a copy of the material and of the booklet. Now we're ready for verse 2. "You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree." Now there's mention of a place, but that's not what we're leading to in regard to God's emphasis of a place. This is their places. And there are other instances in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy where God talks about their building of their gods at the high places, in a certain area in the mountains and so forth. And God says, you will destroy those places. Verse 3, "And you shall tear down the altars and smash their sacred pillars and turn their Asherim," which is just a female deity, "their Asherim with fire, and you shall cut down the engraved images of their gods, and you shall obliterate their name from that place." That's an attack against some bad places that identified the idolatrous nature of the people they were dispossessing in the land where they were going. Now verse 4. "You shall not act like this toward the Lord your God." Verse 5. "But you shall seek the Lord at the place." Now we're getting to it. "At the place which the Lord your God shall choose from all your tribes, to establish his name there for his dwelling, and there you shall come to that place. And there," again, there where? The place. "You shall bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contribution of your hand, your offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of your flock." And there, again, dealing with the place, it's an adverb, of course, but it's talking about the place he'd already mentioned. "There also you and your household shall eat before the Lord your God, and rejoice in all your undertakings in which the Lord your God has blessed you. Now verse 8, you shall not do at all what we're doing here today. Every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. Here was a trend. God's changing things. And he emphasizes over and over again about the place. Now, if that were the only place that he did that, we might move on by it and not think too much about it. But now, I want to give a little emphasis to this now. We've looked in verses 5 and then 3 or 4 times there at that spot. Drop down now to verse 11 and notice what he says again. Then it shall come about that the place in which the Lord your God shall choose for his name to dwell, there you shall bring all that I commanded you, your burnt offerings and the sacrifices, your tithes, the contributions of your hand, and all your choice votive offerings, which you will vow to the Lord. Verse 11, let's don't stop there. Look in verse 14. Emphasis again. But in the place which the Lord chooses, in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. Look at one other verse in this chapter, verse 18. Going to talk again about the place. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God will choose, you, your son and daughter, your male and female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all your undertakings. Again, in this chapter, just repeatedly, he gives emphasis as to the place. As I say, we're going to come back to all this in a moment, but I want us to pick this up first. Move over to the 14th chapter now, from the 8th chapter, or the 12th chapter. In the 14th chapter, we'll be looking at verses 23, 24, and 25. Deuteronomy, 14th chapter, verses 23, 24, and 25. This will again emphasize the place factor. You shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, the first fruit born of your herd and your flock, in order that you may learn to fear the Lord your God. Verse 24. And if the distance is too great to you that you are not able to bring the tithe, since the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you when you bring this to the Lord your God, verse 25, then you shall exchange it for money and bring the money in your hand and go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. Chapter 14 then gives emphasis to the place. Now turn on over to the 16th chapter of Deuteronomy, and we'll look at some verses there. Deuteronomy 16, we'll be beginning in verse 2. And you shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God, brought you out of, for in the month of, no wait, You shall sentence the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd in the place where the Lord chooses to establish his name. Not just in verse 2, but notice verses 5 and 6. You are not allowed to sacrifice the Passover in any of your towns, which the Lord your God's giving you, but at the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. You shall sacrifice the Passover in the evening at sunset, at the time that you come out of, as to the time you came out of Egypt. Verses 5 and 6. But that doesn't stop. Look in verse 7. And you shall cook and eat it in the place which the Lord your God chooses. And he mentioned some other thoughts then. Don't stop there. Drop down to verse 11 in this same chapter. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter and your male and female servant, and the Lord who is in your town, and the stranger, or not, the Levite who is in your town, and the tenants, and the stranger, and the orphan, and the widow, who are in your midst, in the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. Emphasis again on the place. Let's look in verses 15 and 16, same chapter. 7 days you shall celebrate a feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work. Your God will bless you of your hand, so that you shall be altogether joyful. Next verse. Three times. Wait just a moment. Yes, 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread and the feast of weeks and at the feast of booths. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Chapter 16. We'll do one more chapter. 17, verses 8 and 10. Find a similar situation. If any case is too difficult, now we're dealing not with the feast days, but of the times when they needed to render judgment because of some wrongdoing or some supposed wrongdoing. And thus he says, if any case is too difficult for you to decide between one kind of homicide or another, between one kind of lawsuit or another, and between the assault of one another, being cases of dispute in your courts, then you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. Verse 10. And you shall do according to the terms of the verdict which they declare to you from that place which the Lord your God chooses, and you shall be careful to observe according to all that they tell you. Now, we've just quickly run through 3 different chapters. If you check 25 verses that give emphasis to the place. And I want us to move from that now to try to get some identification of the place. I'm not saying that this is the only place, but you'll see in the verses we're about to look at in regard to where the place was. By this time, we're obviously aware that it makes a difference. So now, let's come to 1 Kings. We're moving a number of years down the page from the standpoint of chronology. And in 1 Kings, chapter 11, we're going to get some indication now of the place. First Kings 11, look in verse 13. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I'll give one tribe to you, to your son, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. And it's evident that he's talking in regard to the place that we had seen earlier. Look in verses 32 and verse 33 of the 11th chapter. 32 and 33. But he will have one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel. Now that's a little bit more specific, and it's even more so when we look now also in verse 36. But to his son I'll give one tribe, that my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name. Even more specific there about the name. Now, in what we've just been reading, if you're a little confused as to the phrasing, there had become so much corruption, you remember, in the different tribal situations. And God told them that he was going to take a part of the kingdom away. He'd give it to Jeroboam, but Judah would be left. And he said repeatedly, for the sake of my servant David. And what God had in, again, God's plans were going to be carried out, even though basically corruption had come among the people. That's the background to that. Now, look at one other passage in 1 Kings 14, verse 21. Again, some emphasis on the place. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 21. This is the one who was going to become the king of that one tribe. Now Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen from all the tribes of Israel to put his name. So again, an emphasis in regard to the place, Jerusalem, clearly identified. Turn to 2 Chronicles 6. A little bit further chronologically down the way. 2 Chronicles 6. We'll look at 2 or 3 verses. 2 Chronicles 6, verses 5 and 6. Wait, I'm in 1 Chronicles, excuse me. Some of you may notice that I'm using a little cheater here, and my eyes have been playing tricks some, and so I'm getting a helper, but even it doesn't quite work like all of it when it was in its proper order. Now, 2 Chronicles, the 6th chapter, verses 5 and 6. But I've chosen Jerusalem that my name might be there, and I've chosen David to be over all my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. Look in 2 Chronicles 6, verses 10 and 11 now. Now the Lord has fulfilled his word which he spoke, for I have risen in the place of my father David, that is, Solomon has, and I sat on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised. And I've built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. And there I have set the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord, which he made with the sons of Israel. Those verses again identifying the place and even where the ark was put. And in verse 20, we'll look at it in this chapter. 2 Chronicles 6 and verse 20. That thine eyes may be open toward the house, this house, day and night, toward the place of which thou hast said, that you would put your name there, to listen to the prayer which thy servant shall pray toward that place. Again, emphasis about the place and why it was significant. One other chapter in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 33, 4 and 7. Look at it. 2 Chronicles 33, 4 and 7. This is a bit tedious right now, what I'm doing, but there's a point behind it, and I think that'll be meaningful to us in just a moment. Verse 5. And he built an altar for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. And he made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of the Ben Hinnom. And he practiced witchcraft, used divination, practiced sorcery. The different terrible things that was being done by the king at that time. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And he put the carved image of the idol which he had made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and to Solomon, his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. Or the Hebrew term there, incidentally, forever is olam, O-L-A-M, and it means age lasting. Throughout the age in which the temple would be a factor, God had put his name in that place. Going to move to one other passage, and then we'll start making some points. Turn, if you would, to Nehemiah, the first chapter and verse 9. This is after these that had, like we just read, about bringing these idols and things into the temple of God of all things, and their horrible departures from God's will and way. He sent them into Babylonian captivity. And in Ezra and Nehemiah, you have the information concerning God's plan to bring the people back, however, after one generation basically had died and passed away, and he would give them the country again. And there's still an emphasis on the place. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 9. God said, "But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of the heavens, if you scattered that far, I will gather them from there and will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell." So we've covered really a number of years from the time when the law was being given in Deuteronomy by Moses, down through a period of judges after they even conquered the land, and after that they wanted a king and they got a king and they didn't do well, and Saul, the first king, didn't do well, and David took his place. And then after David, Solomon came on, and even Solomon had brought on back in the direction of idolatry those traits and features that were such that God said he would take them into captivity. And so we move both through Assyrian and Babylonian captivity, and then still God is saying, I'm going to bring you back to this place. Now, as I say, all that's somewhat tedious, and I've covered all of that in order to raise a flag of warning that if we aren't careful, we can follow a similar path. And I believe that we can see how God feels about it in 2 or 3 other passages that we're going to look at. Because the reading I did, as cruelly as I was reading really, but that reading just kept hitting the place. And you listen to that, and it may have surprised you how much emphasis was put on the place. And did you detect anything else that was real special as he related that place to them? What I'm going to do now is just quickly, we're not going back and read all those verses, but I'm going to go back and give some of the expressions that went with that place. And what all this is leading up to is that people can become very satisfied if they're just right at the right place. And they may be missing something. These people did. Now, there's an emphasis on the place, that's obvious. But there's something more important than the place. And here is a brief survey. If you go back to Deuteronomy 12 and verse 5, you will find this expression in the same verse where we read about the place. Seek the Lord at the place where the Lord your God shall choose. Seek the Lord. That was what they needed to do. And what we're leading up to The real significance is not the place, it's the person. In verse 11, the place, he said, that I will choose for his name. And then he added, do all that I command you. And then in verse 18, you will eat before the Lord. Eat before the Lord might be, if we were to bring it up to date in regard to being under Christ, like partaking the Lord's Supper. God said that you will eat before the Lord. The key is not the eating, it's eating before the Lord. And he also said, you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Do you suppose everyone that comes to our services is in a frame of mind to rejoice because they got to come? Just start letting your mind now flow in the direction of some of these expressions that go with the place. Nothing wrong with the place. Place is important, obviously. Think how many passages, 25, that we read concerning the place. But notice what's entwined around those. Deuteronomy 14, verse 23. You will eat. Again, it mentions in verse 23, in the presence of the Lord. The place to establish his name is in that context or in that verse. And then in verse 24, the place that the Lord your God chooses to set his name, that repeatedly is given in these different verses. In the 16th chapter in verse 2, the place the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. Verse 6, the place which the Lord your God, he said that 3 times really. In verse 11, same thing. The Lord your God will establish his name. And then in Deuteronomy 17:10, the place you shall do according to the terms of the verdict. When they were making choices between this person or that person or some wrongdoing or some charge that had been brought against someone. You do it according to the directions or the verdict of the priest. So the key is the decision that's made at the place, not just the place. So all of these different verses are giving an emphasis far greater than the place is the person to whom you relate at the place. I'm going to bring that right on down to us here in a moment. But first, I want us to look at another passage or two. Turn to Jeremiah, if you would, and see a charge that God brought against the people at the time he was planning to take them into captivity, and was warning them through Jeremiah that he was disgusted with them, and it has to do with the place again. But it's what they had allowed to start happening in the place. Jeremiah, the 7th chapter, and we will be looking at verses 1 through 10 as to what had happened. Because you see, really, the book of the nation were all tied up around the place, and they were missing the person and the precepts of God in the process. In Jeremiah 7, verses 1 through 10. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Stand in the gate of the Lord's house, and proclaim there this word, and say, Hear the word of the Lord, all you of Judah who enter these gates to worship the Lord. They were coming to worship. But notice what he's going to say about the kind of people they were and what they were emphasizing. Verse 3. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust in the deceptive word saying, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, 3 times. They were really giving heavy emphasis to what? The place. Verse 5. For if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a man and his neighbor, here's what God's interested in. If you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own ruin. Think of what they were doing while they still went up to the temple of the Lord to worship. Behold, you are trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, and swear falsely, and offer sacrifices to Baal, and walk after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, that you may do all of these abominations? That's what had happened to the people when God was going to reject that generation. And yet, they are still saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Some of you have heard me mention of a person I was visiting in another state, in another day, urging him to come and gather at the assembly with us. He'd come once every 2 months, maybe. And I distinctly remember, he said, Dayton, don't worry about me. I'm all right. I was baptized. Never met with the brethren, not attending Bible classes. But he's all right because he'd been baptized. Now, that's not the place. That's the act. But I'm saying almost the same thing has happened here. They're all right because they are related to what? The temple of the Lord. And at that time, they were committing all of these things that God called abominations, plus even getting into idolatry. But they were all right because they had put the emphasis, like I did at first when I went through reading, on the place. I want to read another passage. This will bring us a little bit closer to our day. Of course, it's still 2,000 years away from us, but at least I'm in the same covenant we're under. So turn to John, the 4th chapter. Passage will be very familiar to you. And we're going to look in verses 19 through 24. You are likely familiar with this particular context. They had come into Samaria. The apostles had gone in to get some bread, and Jesus was there at the well. And you remember a Samaritan woman came, and they had dialogue with each other. And when Jesus pointed out some rather specific things about her life, and she knew she had never seen that man before in her entire existence. That something's unique about this man. And verse 27. No, verse 19. The woman said unto him, or unto Jesus, on the basis of what Christ had just done in telling her about her life, even when she knew he shouldn't know her, but in reality he did. He knew her and all other people in that city where she lived. Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshiped in this mountain. Before we were reading about some of the idolatrous worship in high places and the idols they had in their high places. That kept happening even through the Old Covenant era and into the New Testament era, enough that this woman is aware that some have said, our fathers worshiped in this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. And then what did Jesus say? Woman, believe me, the hour comes when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall you worship the Father. You worship that which you know not. We worship that which we know. But the hour comes, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such does the Father seek to be his worshipers. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. What question did she bring up to Jesus? Our fathers worshiped in the mountains. And then she said, you Jews say Jerusalem is what? The place to worship. Think how many years we've gone through in which people of God have somehow related more to the place than the person who is related to the place. Where I'll put my name, you shall eat. He even said, you will rejoice when you come and eat. And he talks about attitude. He talks about to whom you go in my presence. You know, as we get ready for church services, we will probably think about someone that we want to see that gathers here at this place. We haven't seen them in 3 or 4 days, and we want to touch base with them. And we may come and hope to see someone and find out they're not here. But we were planning and going to talk to them about doing this or that or the other, because we're making plans. And we know them, and we appreciate them, and we like to be with them. Now, I'm just beginning to give some description of things that might be in our mind when we get ready to come here. I don't always know who's going to be here. But I can promise each one of you there are 3 going to be here every time we gather. God, Christ, and the Holy Spirit. They've never missed a service. Now, you and I can't pull that off. We can't be at 2 or 3 different places at the same time. But do we doubt? What did Jesus say at the end of the Great Commission, Matthew 28:20? Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. And when we have the Lord's Supper, appropriately, it'll probably be mentioned that we're to do this in remembrance of me, he said in Luke 22. And so we say the right words to identify that we recognize this, but you might do some of your own thinking and planning as to how much do I think of going to be with God or with Christ or the Holy Spirit. And you might respond, well, we can't shake their hand or talk to them like that. That's right, but when Paul said we walk not by faith, or no, not by sight, we walk by faith. And by faith, if we think about it, we know they are going to be there. And how much will that affect what we may say or do? Our time is just about up. One other passage, just to take home with us. Going back to the first book, Genesis. Turn to Genesis, if you would, the 28th chapter. This is going to be dealing with the time of Jacob. He was leaving to go to Padan Aram, and he met an angel along the way, and they had a little encounter, you remember. But there were some things that he said, one statement in particular that we want to notice. We'll begin in Genesis 28, verse 13. Genesis 28:13. Behold, the Lord stood above it. There was a ladder, incidentally, from earth up to heaven, and angels ascending and descending on that. That's what the context is and what we're looking at. Above it, and the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your fathers, Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie. It's where he'd been spending the night. I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants shall also be like the dust of the earth. That's quite a few people. And you shall spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to the land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. And then Jacob awoke. Jacob's here with us today. Another Jacob. But that Jacob awoke from the sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I know it not, or I did not know it. And he was afraid. And he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Would it be possible for us when we come the next time, if we got a good insight to who was present, or we had thought of God as we should, that we might say, "Behold, the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." That's just something for you to put into your own thinking. But what we're trying to do is understand the will of God. And God one time said, and that's the passage we sprang from in Deuteronomy 12, "You shall not do as we've been doing at this place." And I hope just by making a quick survey of how many times he emphasized the place, and the place makes a difference. I don't think you ought to go somewhere else when brethren are gathering here. I'd suggest try to gather with the brethren. Nothing wrong with that idea. One other thought, just to drop in and try to make the application more meaningful. Do you remember the Sunday morning sermon that Marty gave? I believe he used that word that he said, I don't even know if you can find it in the dictionary or not, congregators. And then he talked about the importance of the family, and the family doing what? Didn't he say assemble? What are you doing? You're getting to the right place. Do you realize how much emphasis he put on the place Sunday morning? But how much did we talk about God being at this place Sunday morning? You see how this can happen, you don't even hardly realize it? To the point they cried out, "The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, we're going to the right place." Good, let's keep doing it. Not a thing wrong with that. But I hope this may help us deepen a little bit who we want to meet when we get here. And try to avoid what Jacob found was his failure. The Lord's in this place, and I knew it not. That's not to bring judgment on anyone, but put it in your think tank. If it'll do any good, just think how many things God wanted us to do. He wanted us to rejoice when we were here. That's okay. That's what he said to them. He wanted them to rejoice in that place. He's given them good things. That's in the context where he said he's going to prosper them, and they could rejoice. And I hope we've done that. I hope we've been together with brethren and gone away with almost chill bumps, thankful for what we heard, what we saw, and what we did. But I'm just saying that these things that made it meaningful is, I'm going to establish my name, where I will place my name. In my presence. These were expressions that made the place meaningful. And we've got even better reasons to have a gratitude to God as our Father. Appreciate you being here. Time's up. And we will get into the first sermon, if you want to look in the booklet, Lord willing, next Wednesday evening, and try to look again at how well do we understand the will of God, or what is involved in understanding the will of God. You're dismissed.